They mocked me for years for being the poor one. Then I inherited the bank accounts they depended on. I stood in that lawyer S office, watching my cousin Rachel S face turn from smug satisfaction to absolute horror in less than 10 seconds. She had spent the last 2 hours sitting across from me with that same condescending smile she'd worn my entire life, the one that said I was beneath her, that I would always be beneath her. My Aunt Linda sat next to her, practically radiating triumph, already planning how to spend money that wasn't hers yet. And my Uncle David, he couldn't even look at me. He never could. To him, I was invisible unless he needed someone to mock at Thanksgiving dinner. But in that moment, when Attorney Morrison read the final clause of my grandmother S. will, when he slid those bank statements across the mahogany table, everything changed. Rachel S. hands started shaking. Linda gasped so loud I thought she was choking. And David? For the first time in 32 years, he actually saw me. Really saw me. Because the poor one, the family embarrassment, the girl they'd laughed at for driving a beat-up Honda and living in a tiny apartment, had just inherited everything they'd been counting on to save their crumbling lives. Before we go any further, I want to know who is watching this story unfold with me right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what country and city you're from. Are you watching from New York? Los Angeles? Maybe somewhere across the ocean? I love seeing where all of you are tuning in from, so don't be shy. Let me know you're here. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how we got here. My grandmother, Dorothy, was the matriarch of our family. She came from old money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Her husband, my grandfather, had built a successful manufacturing business back in the 70s, and when he passed away 15 years ago, he left her very comfortable. We are talking multiple properties, investment accounts, and a vacation home in Cape Cod that my cousins treated like their personal resort. Dorothy was kind, proper, and she had this way of seeing through people that made you feel naked in front of her. Rachel and I are only 6 months apart in age. We should have been best friends, right? Two girls growing up in the same family, going to the same schools, attending the same holiday dinners. But Rachel S. mother, my Aunt Linda, made sure that never happened. See, my mom married my dad for love. He was a high school teacher with a good heart and a modest salary. We lived comfortably, but we weren't wealthy. We didn't take exotic vacations or drive luxury cars. Rachel S. father, on the other hand, was a corporate attorney who made serious money. They lived in a massive house in the suburbs with a pool and a 3-car garage. Rachel got a BMW for her 16th birthday. I got driving lessons in my mama's Toyota. The comparison started early. I remember being 8 years old at a family barbecue, wearing a dress my mom had found on clearance at Target. Rachel showed up in something from Nordstrom, and I heard Aunt Linda whisper to another relative, "It is such a shame about Savannah as family. They do the best they can with what they have." That phrase became a constant refrain throughout my childhood. It was code for, they re-poor and we re-not. At Christmas, Rachel would get extravagant gifts, electronics, jewelry, trips to Europe. I'd get practical things, books, clothes I needed anyway. And every single time, Aunt Linda would make a comment about how different our lives were. Dorothy saw all of this. I'm sure of it. But she was from a generation that didn't interfere in how her children raised their kids. She loved us both, treated us both with affection, but she never corrected Linda's behavior. I used to wonder if she agreed with them, if she thought less of me because my parents didn't have money. Now I know she was just watching, taking mental notes, waiting to see who we'd all become. College was when the mockery really intensified. Rachel went to a prestigious private university on the East Coast. Full tuition, no loans, spending money deposited into her account every month. I went to a state school on a combination of scholarships, grants, and student loans. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus library to cover my living expenses. I ate ramen more nights than I'd like to admit. But I graduated with honors, got a decent job as a graphic designer, and started my adult life. Rachel, meanwhile, partied her way through 4 years, barely graduated, and moved back home because she couldn't figure out what she wanted to do with her life. Her parents supported her completely. The family gatherings during those years were torture. Uncle David loved to corner me at every event and ask about my little apartment and my little job. He'd use that word, little, like everything about my life was miniature and insignificant. How's the little car running, Savannah? Still driving that old thing? How's the little apartment? Still in that neighborhood? He never asked because he cared. He asked because it gave him pleasure to remind me that I was less than them. Rachel would sit there with her wine glass, smirking, occasionally adding her own jabs. I just don't know how you do it, Savannah. I could never live in such a small space. My parents felt it too. I saw the way my dad's jaw would tighten when David made his comments, the way my mom's smile would become forced. But they never defended themselves, never fought back. They had too much dignity for that. They just kept showing up, kept being kind, kept acting like the insults didn't land. I learned from them. I learned to smile through the pain, to nod along when Rachel bragged about her latest shopping spree, to pretend like their words didn't cut me every single time. Then, about 5 years ago, things started to shift. Rachel got married to a guy named Brett who worked in finance. Big wedding, hundreds of guests, held at a country club that probably cost more than my annual salary. Within a year, they bought a house, a massive colonial with a mortgage that should have terrified them. But Rachel had always lived beyond her means, always assumed there would be more money coming from somewhere. Brett was the same way. They bought expensive furniture, drove luxury cars, took trips to Napa and Aspen. From the outside, their life looked perfect. Behind the scenes, I later learned, they were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, mortgage payments they could barely afford. But they kept up appearances because that is what mattered to people like Rachel. Uncle David and Aunt Linda weren't doing much better. David had made some bad investments, the kind you make when you think you were smarter than everyone else. He lost a significant chunk of their savings in some tech startup that went under. Linda, who had never worked a day in her adult life, suddenly found herself worried about money for the first time in decades. They didn't downsize, didn't adjust their lifestyle, just kept spending and hoping something would save them. And that something, they assumed, would be Dorothy's inheritance. My grandmother was getting older. She was in her mid-80s, still sharp as a tack, but her health was declining. The family started circling like vultures. Rachel and Brett began visiting her every weekend, suddenly so concerned about Grandma's well-being. Linda called her multiple times a day. David started talking about Dorothy's finances openly at family dinners, speculating about the value of her estate. It was grotesque. They weren't mourning her while she was still alive. They were counting her money. I visited Dorothy too, but not because I wanted anything from her. I visited because I loved her. I'd stop by on weekday evenings after work, bring her groceries, help her with small tasks around the house. We'd sit in her living room and talk about everything, my work, her memories, old family stories. She'd tell me about my grandfather, about building their life together. Money doesn't make you better than anyone, Savannah, she told me once. It just reveals who you already are. I didn't know then how much weight those words would carry. About 8 months before she passed, Dorothy had a mild heart attack. Nothing life-threatening, but it was a wake-up call. The entire family descended on her hospital room like she was already dead. Rachel cried dramatically, clutching Dorothy's hand. Linda fussed over every doctor's report. David paced in the hallway, probably already calling his financial advisor. I just sat quietly in the corner, watching this performance, feeling sick. When Dorothy came home, she asked me to stay with her for a few weeks while she recovered. Not Rachel, not Linda. Me. I took time off work, slept in her guest room, made her meals, drove her to appointments. We grew even closer during those weeks. One night, she looked at me with those sharp blue eyes and said, "You know they're only here for the money, don't you?" I stammered something about family being complicated. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. Don't make excuses for them, Savannah. I've watched them my whole life. I know exactly who they are, and I know exactly who you are. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But something in her tone made my stomach flip. Dorothy passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, peacefully in her sleep. I got the call from Aunt Linda, who was sobbing hysterically. When I arrived at Dorothy's house, it was already full of people, and right in the center was Rachel, accepting condolences like she was the grieving granddaughter. She shot me a look when I walked in, a look that said, "Don't even think about making this about you." The funeral was 3 days later. Beautiful service, dignified and respectful. But I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could see were the fake tears, the performances. Rachel wore a black designer dress and oversized sunglasses, dabbing at her eyes even though I never saw actual tears. Linda gave a eulogy that was more about herself than Dorothy. David stood stoically, but I saw him checking his watch twice during the service. At the reception, that is when the whispers started. I was standing by the coffee table when I heard Rachel S. voice from the next room. She was talking to Brett in a hushed tone. "The reading is next week," she said. "Mom thinks it is going to be split evenly and then obviously passed down to us." Brett said something I couldn't hear, and Rachel laughed. "Oh, please, Savannah's not getting anything significant. Grandma knew she needed help, sure, but the real money goes to people who can actually manage it." I stood there, frozen, feeling like I'd been punched. Not because I expected to inherit anything, but because of the casual cruelty in Rachel S. voice. The assumption that I was less deserving, less capable. It was 32 years of mockery distilled into one sentence. I walked out of that reception, sat in my car, and cried for 20 minutes. Not for the money I wouldn't get, but for the family I'd never really had. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Attorney Morrison S. office downtown. Fancy place, all dark wood and leather chairs. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to be there. The waiting room was tense. Uncle David sat with his arms crossed, leg bouncing nervously. Aunt Linda kept checking her makeup. Rachel and Brett whispered to each other, occasionally glancing at me with those same smug expressions. My parents were there too, looking uncomfortable. My mom squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we were proud of you." Attorney Morrison called us in at exactly 10 o'clock. He was an older gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses and an unreadable expression. We all took our seats around a massive conference table. Rachel positioned herself directly across from Morrison, like she was the star of this show. I sat at the far end with my parents. Morrison opened a leather folder and pulled out documents. "First," he began, "I want to say that Mrs. Dorothy Hamilton was very clear about her wishes. She updated this will 8 months ago, and she was of completely sound mind. Everything you're about to hear reflects her exact intentions." Rachel leaned forward, practically salivating. Morrison started with small bequests. Jewelry divided among several people. China to a cousin in Vermont. Then he got to the real estate. The primary residence will be sold, and the proceeds will be distributed according to the following terms. He paused. Rachel was smiling. Linda had tears in her eyes. "To my son, David Hamilton, I leave the sum of $50,000. David's face fell slightly. 50,000 wasn't nothing, but it clearly wasn't to what he'd expected. "To my daughter-in-law, Linda Hamilton, I leave my collection of first edition books and the sum of $25,000. Linda's mouth opened in shock. "To my granddaughter, Rachel Turner, I leave the sum of $30,000. Rachel's face went white. "30,000? That was it?" Brett put his hand on her arm, but she shook him off. "There must be a mistake," she said sharply. "Grandma had millions. $30,000? Morrison held up a hand. "Please let me finish." He turned to another page. "To my daughter, Catherine, and her husband, James, I leave the sum of $100,000. My mom gasped. My dad's eyes went wide. But Morrison wasn't done. He looked directly at me. "And finally, to my granddaughter, Savannah Mitchell, I leave the remainder of my estate." The room went completely silent. Rachel's face had gone from white to red. Linda made a strangled sound. David stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. "What?" he shouted. "The remainder? What does that mean?" Morrison pulled out bank statements and slid them across the table. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "The remainder of the estate," Morrison said calmly, "includes the following: 4 investment accounts with a combined value of approximately $3.2 million, the vacation property in Cape Cod, currently valued at $1.8 million, and various other assets bringing the total to approximately $6.4 million. He looked at me. "Miss Mitchell, after taxes and bequests, you will inherit approximately $4.7 million. I thought I was going to pass out. $4.7 million. The number didn't even sound real. But Morrison's face was serious. The papers were real. And the looks on my family's faces, those were definitely real. Rachel exploded. "This is insane. This has to be a mistake. Grandma would never give everything to Savannah. Morrison remained calm. Mrs. Hamilton left a letter to be read at this time. He pulled out an envelope with my grandmother's handwriting. Would you like me to read it aloud? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He opened the envelope and began. To my family, I have spent the last years of my life watching all of you very carefully. I've seen who visits out of love and who visits out of expectation. I've seen who asks how I am doing and who asks how much I am worth. Rachel, Linda, David, I love you. But I've also seen your choices, your values. You've spent your lives chasing appearance over substance. You've made poor decisions and expected others to bail you out. You've treated Savannah like she was less than you simply because she chose a different path. Morrison paused, glancing at Rachel, whose face was now streaked with tears. He continued. Savannah has never asked me for anything. She visited me because she loved me, helped me because she cared, lived her life with dignity despite being mocked by her own family. She is the person I hoped you all would become. This inheritance is not a punishment for you. It is a recognition of who she is. She will use this money wisely because she understands its value. I trust Savannah with my legacy. With all my love, Dorothy. The silence was deafening. I couldn't look at anyone. Tears streamed down my face. My grandmother had seen me. Really seen me. All those years of quiet observation, she'd been understanding what I'd been through, validating every moment of hurt. She'd given me the greatest gift, not just the money, but the recognition that I was worthy. Linda broke the silence with a sound that was half sob, half scream. She turned on me, face contorted with rage. You manipulated her. You poisoned her against us. I finally found my voice. I never asked her for anything, not once. I was there because I loved her. David was pacing. This is ridiculous. We are contesting this. There's no way this holds up. Morrison stood up. Mr. Hamilton, this will is ironclad. Mrs. Hamilton had it reviewed by multiple attorneys. She was of sound mind. There are no grounds for contest. Rachel was sobbing now, real heaving sobs. Then she looked up at me with pure hatred. I hope you're happy, Savannah. Brett and I are drowning. My parents are struggling. And you just took away the one thing that could have saved us. I met her eyes. Maybe if you'd lived within your means, maybe if you'd worked hard instead of expecting handouts, maybe if you'd treated people with respect, you wouldn't need saving. The meeting ended shortly after. Morrison gave me his card, told me we'd need to meet again. My parents were crying, hugging me. But I couldn't focus. I just kept seeing Rachel's face, Linda's shock, David's rage. The people who had made me feel small my entire life had just been shown they were wrong. As we left, I heard Rachel shouting behind me, something about fairness, about family. But I didn't turn around. I just walked out with my head held high. The poor one, the embarrassment, the girl with the little apartment and the little job, had just inherited a fortune. But more than that, I'd inherited validation. Proof that living with integrity matters, that kindness has value. Over the next months, Rachel and Brett tried to contest the will, but their lawyer told them the same thing. It was uncontestable. They eventually dropped it, but not before Rachel sent me vicious text messages. I blocked her number. Linda tried begging for help, saying they were facing foreclosure. My mom told Linda that I would make my own decisions. David just disappeared, too embarrassed to show his face anymore. As for me, I didn't go crazy with the money. I paid off my student loans. I bought my parents a comfortable house so they could retire. I invested most of it. I did buy a nicer apartment and upgrade my car, but nothing flashy. Because that was never what this was about. The Cape Cod house, Dorothy's beloved vacation home that Rachel had used like her personal playground. I kept it. I go there sometimes on weekends, sit on the porch overlooking the ocean, and I talk to Dorothy. I tell her about my life, about the choices I'm making with her legacy, about how much her letter meant to me. I like to think she can hear me. I ran into Rachel once, about a year later, at a coffee shop. She was with her daughter. Rachel looked tired, older than her 32 years. She saw me and her whole body tensed. I stopped. "Hi, Rachel," I said quietly. She stared at me and I saw so many emotions. Anger, shame, regret. Finally, she just nodded. "Hi." We stood there in awkward silence. Then her daughter tugged on her hand, and Rachel turned away. As I watched her leave, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt sad. Sad for the family we could have been. But I also felt grateful. Grateful for parents who taught me hard work. Grateful for a grandmother who saw me when no one else did. Grateful for every struggle, because all of it shaped me into someone Dorothy could trust. The money changed my life in practical ways, sure. But the real inheritance was the message that who you are matters more than what you have, that integrity outlasts appearance, that the people who mock you for having less are usually just afraid of being exposed for having nothing that matters. So if you're out there feeling looked down on, feeling like you are not enough because you don't have what others have, let me tell you something. Keep being you. Keep living with integrity. Keep working hard and treating people with kindness. Keep showing up with dignity even when others try to diminish you. Because the people who are truly watching, they see you. And someday, in ways you can't even imagine, that will be worth more than all the money in the world. Now, before you go, if you made it this far, if this story resonated with you, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button below. This channel is all about real stories, real struggles, real triumphs. Also, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by your family? Have you ever been the underdog who proved everyone wrong? Share your story. I read every single comment. Sometimes just knowing someone else understands makes all the difference. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to my story. And remember, your worth is not determined by what you have. It is determined by who you are.